Well, friends, at the beginning of this month, after a trial that lasted 8 years, Judge Irma Schoeman handed down a not guilty verdict to Timothy Omotoso and his co-accused, who faced multiple charges of rape, of sexual assault, of human trafficking, and of racketeering. Now, millions of South Africans stood by with an expression of horror and shock on their face as the justice system seemed to fail us once again. Once again, this case has drawn attention to the state of our justice system and the urgent need for reforms in our justice system. And joining us to discuss the implications of this outcome of the Omotoso case is Liesl Pretorius. She's the head of legal at Freedom of Religion South Africa. Liesl, thank you so much for making time to speak to us.
Thank you, Mark.
So, here's the opening question. Has religion been used to cover up a crime? In this particular case, is religion ever an excuse to cover up crime?
Well, first of all, Mark, I just want to say that ForSA's heart and prayers goes out to the survivors who took the brave step to come forward to testify and who were hoping for justice to be served and now feel disappointed and betrayed. We are shocked and dismayed by this outcome as well. And as to your question, is religion ever a cover for a crime? And the answer is an unequivocal no. What is particularly shocking about this case is that the accused used the guise of a religious leader and abused this position of trust to gain access to victims. But it is clear that this seems to have been nothing but a criminal front. The fact that Timothy Omotoso claims to be a pastor does not make what happened a religious crime. A crime is a crime is a crime. It doesn't matter whether you're a pastor, whether you're a politician, whether you're a postman. The same criminal law applies equally to all. And to be clear and to emphasize, the right to freedom of religion is not, and it has never been a defense or an excuse for committing any form of abuse or for committing any form of a crime.
Liesl, I watched this from the sidelines. The news organization that I follow followed this trial, and so I listened in. I followed some of the testimony. I listened to as much as I could regarding what was happening. As an outsider, it seemed very clear that not only was there a case to answer, but the case seemed incredibly strong. So my question to you is, if this man committed a crime, which from the outside looking in, it seems so clear that he did, how on earth has he been found not guilty?
Yes, as you say, from the outside looking in, it seems very clear. But we need to remember that in our criminal law, in South Africa, an accused person is presumed innocent until proven guilty, and none of us want to live in a system where you are presumed guilty until proven innocent. So that's a very important feature of our criminal justice system. And in a criminal case, the prosecution has the onus because the state is accusing a person. So representing the state, have the onus to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a very high standard because we don't want innocent people going to jail. Now, in this case, especially if you listen to what the judge said, it is the prosecutor who failed dismally to clear this hurdle of evidence, which means that the judge had no other option but to acquit because the judge is bound by rules of procedure and rules of evidence that she needs to apply. And if the prosecutor does not do a good job of presenting the case properly, then the judge has no other option but to acquit. And this is part and parcel of a democratic justice system. None of us, like I said, want to live in a system where you are presumed guilty and proven innocent. We want trials that are fair. We want procedure to be followed. People need to have a fair trial. But the flip side of this is that when procedure is not properly followed, either by the police or by the prosecution, criminals can walk free. And sometimes criminals do walk free. And looking from the outside, as you say, it seems to be what happened in this case. And that's why everyone, or many South Africans, are very shocked and dismayed. And then, the shock and dismay comes because the justice system fails to meet public expectations and the public feels that justice has not been served. So it's very deeply unsatisfying when technicalities, when procedural errors, insufficient evidential, technicalities around evidence, and not really something substantive, when that leads to an outcome, and then it leaves victims without closure and society, disgruntled, shocked, and looking for someone to blame.
And frustrated. I absolutely frustrated. Completely angry is probably the word, as I describe reading articles and seeing people get off on what appears to be technicalities. Like you expect to see this in the movies, but you don't expect to see this work itself out in real life. In real life, you expect everyone to do their job, to do it well, and for people who are guilty to have to face up to their crimes. You might already have given us an indication, but maybe you could flesh out in your own opinion, where does the blame for this lie?
Well, in the Timothy Omotoso case, I think we should blame or point the finger of blame where it belongs, and I will be guided by Judge Irma Schoeman in this regard when she was the judge on the case, and she very severely criticized the state's handling of the case. She referred to the state's cross-examination of the three accused, saying it was as if it never happened. Now, cross-examination is very important. When a case is presented, somebody has a testimony, it has to be cross-examined to test the veracity of it. Because if a statement is made or there's evidence that is not tested or not refuted, it must be accepted as truth. And 9 days were allocated for this cross-examination. It's a key part of the trial, but the cross-examination of Timothy Omotoso lasted less than a morning, which is really shocking. It's beyond belief. And the judge, and there was something like I forget the exact account, but there was like in the upwards of 30 counts of criminal counts against him, and the cross-examination takes less than a morning. And the judge also slammed the state prosecutor's handling of the case, citing irregularities that are committed. And such irregularities can essentially corrupt a trial, rendering a trial unfair. And you cannot convict a person if their trial is unfair. So it's very important to also follow procedure. Procedure is very important in law. You need to have the substantive case, but you have to follow procedure as well. We can't have procedurally unfair trials. And to quote the judge's words, she said it's inconceivable that the prosecutor with 14 years experience does not know what the definition of rape is. And that this is either extremely incompetent or dishonest. This is what the judge said. Because if you don't know the definition of a crime, how as a prosecutor, because you have to prove that crime. So you need to know what the elements of that crime is. So you have to present evidence that fulfills those elements. Otherwise, you've not proven that the crime was committed. And a prosecutor should be able to do this, especially an experienced prosecutor. And this is a high-profile case. Well, you want an experienced, competent prosecutor on any case. But this is a high-profile case. Why was this not done? And this is why even Parliament, I read a news article, it was published on Parliament's website, where a member of the Portfolio Committee on Justice said that they want the MPA to come and explain what happened here. Because South Africans are shocked by what happened. The judge is shocked and dismayed by what happened. This is why she so very severely criticized the handling of this case. And it seems quite rightly so.
I'm reminded of Psalm 10. Being a pastor, I get to quote from the Bible, and it turns out that injustice has always been with us. Psalm 10 says, Lord, why do you stand so far away? Why do you hide in times of trouble? In arrogance, the wicked relentlessly pursue their victims. Let them be caught in the schemes they have devised. For the wicked one boasts about his own craving. He goes on to say that the wicked person thinks arrogantly there is no accountability since there is no God. And in response, the psalmist says, rise up, Lord, lift up your hand. And in other places, really calls on the Lord to deal with these perpetrators of crime, these evil men, even breaking the arm of the wicked and evil person, like really harsh language, but you can understand it because there's injustice that has been committed. In such a case of injustice, what is the way forward? Where's the recourse? How do we move forward in this?
Yes, I mean, oh, it's a horrible situation. But how do we move forward? We need real reforms. Um, we need to, as a nation, consider what are the next steps. We must ensure that we have helpful conversations so that situations like these are avoided in future, and that women and children and men are kept safe and protected by the law. That we have real solutions. Because I know I've heard from prosecutors as well that conviction rate often for these kinds of cases, even ones that are not high profile, it's not very high. So that's very concerning. We have to do more to protect our women and children, and not be distracted by things that don't actually of our solutions. Um, so, we need to think about a justice system that works, people who are competent to do their jobs properly. If the justice system, the members of the justice system did their jobs properly, um, all indications are that they would have secured a conviction. As ForSA, as a legal advocacy organization that protects religious freedom in South Africa, we are also concerned and we are adamant that a tragic outcome such as this should not and must not be used as a reason to paint the entire faith community in a bad light. The vast majority of religious leaders and persons of faith spend their lives faithfully serving their communities, and they play a vital role in strengthening the moral fabric of society. And if you look at the landscape of South Africa, they have a lot of work to do. They need to work harder to strengthen the moral landscape of our society. They do tremendous good, feeding programs, reaching out to widows and orphans and homeless people and etc. So people like Timothy Omotoso and others like him, they are the exception. They're not the rule. They're not the rule. But we do need to strengthen the justice system, and not expand state control, because that is always a concern when something like this happens. There's a tragedy that happened, and the people start looking for solutions, but we need the right solutions, not the wrong solutions.
Liesl, that last comment that you made, relation to the emphasizing the need for justice reform, but you also mentioned the call for state control of religion. Obviously, there is a move afoot. We've been seeing it for a number of years. Calls been made in certain sectors for the state to exercise control over the religious sector, and ForSA has been very consistent in terms of making representation on behalf of the church, but religion in general, that wouldn't be a good idea. But maybe you could flesh that out a little bit as to why you would call for the building up of the justice system, but at the same time not be calling for the state to control religion.
Yes, because unfortunately, there has been calls, unfortunately, opportunistic calls, I would say, for the state to regulate religion under the guise of protecting women and children. We must absolutely protect women and children. We must absolutely prevent and address crimes and abuse. But regulation of religion is not the answer. And this was the regulation of religion by the state was pursued by the Commission for Cultural Religious and Linguistic Rights, the CRL Rights Commission, between 2014 2018, and it was rejected by Parliament. And now, recently in February this year, because the person who was the chairperson at that time has been reappointed, it's squarely back on the table. And there's now this push to do research and investigate specifically the Christian sector, it seems. We're still waiting for more details to address, abuses and criminal acts and things like this. But a criminal is a criminal is a criminal. If you commit a crime, it's because you're a criminal. It's not a religious crime. If you sexually assault people, it's a criminal offense. It doesn't matter who you are. So you have to separate the issues, address the real issues, because otherwise you're going to come forward with a solution that does not solve the issue and that opens the door to detrimental and far-reaching detrimental consequences. During this previous attempt to impose state regulation of religion, ForSA went through the cases that were cited, the examples, and it was found that for each of those examples, there was existing criminal law or an existing law that should have been applied. So just apply the law properly, and then this can be solved. So the real issue is laws not being enforced, lack of capacity or incompetence from state authorities, or persons not reporting these things. These things need to be reported. So more laws will not solve the problem. And just blanket blaming religious leaders or proposing unconstitutional state regulation of religion is effectively not the solution to the problem, because state regulation of religion, even if it comes under a good intention or guise, it really is a Trojan horse. Because if the state, because what is being proposed seems to be the same thing as the previous round. These are at least the initial remark. We're still waiting to see how this unfolds. But there's been mention of peer review mechanisms, vetting of religious leaders. You cannot go into doctrine. You cannot do that. Our constitution has very broad protection of this, and that's not the place of the state to do that. If you are concerned about fringe elements, a handful of individuals who abuse their positions in the religious community or use it as a guise, as a front for what is actually just criminal activity, then what you need is education and awareness. You need people to report these individuals, and there are other ways to deal this without opening the door to undermining our very precious right to freedom of religion. Because if you look at countries that have imposed state regulation of religion, churches get shut down, and not just churches, other religious institutions as well. But it gives the state control, and then eventually it really opens the door to the state saying, we like this church, so they're allowed to exist, and we like this religious leader, and they're allowed to exist, and not these. That is what it opens the door to. So it's very important to really look at what will be the real solutions, and not, even if it's with the best of intention, don't open the door to something somewhere down the line you've now enabled your right to religious freedom to be really clamped down on. That is not going to help anybody.
Absolutely. I mean, that's really Baptist history. That's the history that we come from. So I'm very aware of that, even from a church history perspective. But you used the word solution about halfway through the last question, and I'd be very interested to hear, having gone through the last round of the CRL submissions and having been with ForSA and listened to you guys the whole way through that, and just heard the counter submissions that you made and the representations that you made, and attended a number of the road shows that you guys put on. What are you calling for really at this stage of the game?
Well, we think it's evident, that the prosecution, the state failed the victims in the Omotoso case abysmally. So dealing with that issue, we call on the government to significantly increase its investment in and support for a competent and efficient law enforcement system and judicial process that will ensure that there's swift and successful prosecution of criminals and justice for victims. We also call on religious leaders and all members of the faith community to not tolerate any form of abuse, any criminal activity, and to report it to the relevant authorities without delay. And I think it's very important for religious leaders to raise awareness and education. There's also education about these things. There are numerous, for example, umbrella organizations that exist in the religious community that churches can belong to that help to ensure that there is accountability. It's very important. This self-regulation, accountable, responsible self-regulation, that really is key. But yeah, just to summarize, we need a justice system that is equipped to deal with all criminals, and not one that scapegoats religious leaders, these few people who, because it really is a handful. It's not nearly the majority of leaders. It's a small handful who can deal with them. And we shouldn't open the door to, I wouldn't say knee-jerk reaction, but to solutions or proposals that aren't real solutions and that might in the long term cause bigger problems. We need real solutions that address this issue, that provides justice to victims, that prevents these crimes and abuses from happening in the first place, and at the same time protects our precious religious freedom.
Look, if you're a pastor and you're listening in, can I encourage you to go to the ForSA website? Their website is forza.org.za. And there you can find, well, newsletters, articles, videos, a whole lot of information about the broader question of religious freedom in South Africa. I'd really encourage you. It's an excellent resource base. They're doing great work. You can also find out there how you can support the work that they're doing. And so I really would encourage you, whether you're a pastor or whether you're a viewer and a concerned citizen, what South Africa really needs is concerned citizens right now. And then there's also the socials. You can hit them on Facebook as well as YouTube, both places where they release content, and try and keep the church and people who are interested in this ongoing conversation informed of what's going on. Liesl, as always, I am glad that I got to speak to you. It's not a great topic that we got to speak on today, just this injustice which seems to have occurred. But at the same time, it's really great that you guys make time to speak to the church. It's great that you lobby the church. And I'm very grateful for the work that you do representing the interest of the religious sector to our state. So thank you very much. Strength to your arm. And I do trust the Lord blesses you as you continue.
Thank you, Mark.